Do I sleep in for a longer time, or do I get out of bed and go for my morning run? Do I indulge in that extra serving of dessert, or do I continue to pursue and persevere after my fitness goals? Do I register for that course now, or do I choose to relax? We got to understand that the quality of our life, the outcomes of our life are really determined by the desires that we yield to. Because desires build us or they break us down. I'd like to classify desires into two categories: cost and investment. Every desire involves a price. Now, when you pay the price upfront, well, it's an investment which will always yield a return later. On the other hand, if you choose to enjoy the pleasure of that desire upfront, it will involve paying a cost later. And if the desires determine our outcomes, then we indeed need to be really prudent and wise while choosing the desires we want to yield to. But the question is, how can I wisely choose these desires? To answer that question, I'd like to share with you 4 other questions that you can ask yourself every time you encounter that decision moment of choosing to yield to a particular desire or not. Well, the first question is this a God-pleasing desire? Psalm 37, and if I'm not mistaken, it's verse 4, which says, "Delight yourself in the Lord, and He will give you the desires of your heart." Every time you yield to a God-pleasing desire, it always culminates in lasting satisfaction and joy. The second question that you need to ask yourself is, by yielding to this desire, how long will the potential satisfaction of this desire last? And the point here is between instant gratification and long-term satisfaction. In Proverbs chapter 6, if I'm not mistaken, 6 to 8, we are advised to go and consider the ways of an ant. Ant is the smallest of creatures, no supervision, no supervisor, no manager, but yet in summer, it chooses to store up food so that it can gather at harvest or at winter. In summer, when it can be relaxing and in today's language, chilling, it chooses to store up. It chooses long-term satisfaction instead of instant gratification. And there's so many experiments and research done on the consequence of long-term satisfaction versus instant gratification. I'd like to quickly just summarize one experiment that was done several years ago. There was a bunch of kids. They were brought into a room, and in the middle of the room was a box of chocolates. And the kids were told, you can help yourself to the chocolates, but there's one condition. If you take a chocolate now, you can take only one chocolate. But if you wait for 2 hours, you can take as many chocolates as you want. Now, these are 4 to 6-year-old kids. The experiment concluded with a large majority of that group of kids who succumbed to instant gratification. They took that one chocolate, while a smaller group of waited for 2 hours and helped themselves to as many chocolates as they wanted. The experiment didn't end there, but it progressed. These kids were tracked, and many years later, they wanted to look at what happened to these 2 sets of kids, right? The kids that succumbed to instant gratification versus the kids that, delayed the gratification and waited for 2 hours and helped themselves later. Well, long story short, the kids that chose a long-term satisfaction were kids who got themselves educated really well. They were kids who were well settled. They were financially independent, and they were, people who contributed to society. The same could not have been said of the first group of kids who succumbed to instant gratification. There's a behavioral science here, and it's up to us, right, to realize that do not let impulsiveness cause you to yield to desires which deny you of long-term satisfaction. Remember, long-term satisfaction always trumps instant gratification. The third question that you need to ask yourself is, is this a desire that creates value, or is it a desire that erodes value? I think it's James chapter 1 and verse 15 where we read, when desire is conceived, it gives birth to sin, and when sin is fully grown, it gives birth to death, right? So the point is, you need to ask yourself, does this desire, by yielding to this desire, does it kind of create value? Does it add? Does it build, or does it subtract? Right? For example, the phone addiction. Is it something that is adding value? Or is it something that's impacting my concentration, it's impacting my attention span, it's eroding my ability to focus? Versus another desire of saying, I'm going to fill my mind with useful content. Now you got to choose the desires that you yield to. Are they adding value, or are they eroding value? And lastly, the fourth question is, does this desire lead me towards my purpose, or does it distract me away from my purpose? There are so many examples of people who really started well, full of promise, full of potential. But somewhere along the way, they yielded to desires which not only distracted them, but derailed them from their purpose. Now, this should serve us as a warning to be careful, right? Living out our purpose is the most important thing, right? And desires that distract us should be avoided. But desires that keep us in track towards our purpose, that's the desires that we need to yield to. So these are these 4 questions. Are these God-pleasing desires? Are these desires which bring lasting satisfaction? Are these desires which create value? Are these desires which lead me towards my purpose? If your answer to these 4 questions are yes, well, that's a desire that you need to yield to. Remember, it's wise for us to understand the consequences of a particular desire before yielding to a desire, which will really serve us so well in choosing the right kind of desires. Like I said at the beginning, desires determine the outcome of our life and the legacy that we build. So choose well, yield to the right kind of desires. Thank you for watching Word in Brief. I would encourage you to subscribe to my YouTube channel, click on that bell icon. You will find content on faith and on leadership. God bless.